Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the launch of our new M&AI report on identifying barriers and opportunities within the professional planning practice in Ontario. So my name is Sarah O'Neill, and I'm a Senior Research Associate at Smart Prosperity Institute, and I will be guiding us through today's agenda. Before we begin, just a few housekeeping items. For anyone new to the Zoom webinar platform, you may have noticed that we were muted on your arrival to this webinar, and that's just so that we can keep the background noise to a minimum. So we just ask that you keep yourselves on mute during the presentation. If you have any questions, please use the chat box feature. If you're having technical difficulties, you can send a direct message to either myself or Matt, who is labeled under technical support. But if you have general questions, you can also type those into the chat box as well. We'll hold all the questions till the end of the presentation, and then I'll go through at that point any questions that were written in the chat box. And then you can also use the raise your hand feature in the Zoom platform, and then I can unmute you and you can voice your question at that point. And also just a note that we are recording today's session. So if you know of someone who would be interested in this presentation but couldn't join us today, or if after this presentation we'd like to share this around with some of your colleagues, we are going to post it on our website, so it will be publicly available to share. So just to start off with anyone who's not familiar with Smart Prosperity Institute, we are a national research network and think tank based at the University of Ottawa. We deliver world-class research and work with public and private partners, all to advance practical policies and market solutions for a stronger and cleaner economy. So we are one of 4 convening partners of the Municipal Natural Assets Initiative, along with the David Suzuki Foundation, the Town of Gibsons, BC, and Brooke and Associates. The Municipal Natural Assets Initiative basically offers a methodology and support for local governments to integrate natural assets into core asset management and financial processes using the same systems as for engineered assets. And there's a lot going on with the M&AI these days. So at this point, I'd like to take this opportunity to provide you with an update of some of the exciting things that are happening right now. So if we can make it work, I'll turn it over to Roy Brooke, who is the director of the M&AI, who will quickly take us through some of the highlights for right now.
Right? Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so thank you. So just to step back very briefly, the core idea of Municipal Natural Assets Initiative is that a natural asset such as a forest or a creek or a wetland can provide much the same services as an engineered asset, but at a lower cost, and often with no end of useful life. Notwithstanding this, many municipalities are looking at natural assets, if at all, very narrowly and not for the full range of services that they can provide. In 2003, Gibsons, Town of Gibsons, BC, broke from the pack and has pioneered some very exciting work, North America's first natural asset management policy, basically managing their aquifer, their forest, and their foreshore in much the same way as they would manage a bridge or a building or anything else. Also with some restoration and rehabilitation implied in all of this, have realized some substantial cost savings in some of these areas. Based on all of this, a group of stakeholders got together in 2015, asked, could this or should this be replicated? The answer was a resounding yes, in particular because local governments across Canada are being forced to uptake modern structured asset management systems and processes, and natural assets, because that turns around the idea of sustainable service delivery, natural assets fit very, very nicely into that overall asset management framework that local governments have to do. This led to cohort 1, which you'll see on the screen. City of Nanaimo, District of West Vancouver, City of Grand Forks, region of Peel, and City of Town of Oakville. And you'll see technical reports coming out very soon. but maybe just two very quick highlights here. One is that in all core cases, through the work that was done, and there's lots of information on our website about how we do the work, we found in all cases that not only do the natural assets have substantial value, but that value increases over time under climate change scenarios. You know, an engineered asset, it's a very linear asset. A pipe that's X centimeters wide, that's what it will do. That's how much water it will convey. But ecosystems can be resilient to the effects of climate change and manage increased flow volumes, peak volumes in many scenarios, thus making them more valuable in climate change scenarios. And perhaps another consideration is that they have no necessarily end of useful life, whereas an engineered asset will last maybe 50, 100 years, then you got to dig it up and get rid of it. So those very exciting results from those 5 projects. You'll see the technical reports, as I say, in a couple of weeks. We have, building on that round, just launched a second cohort, which takes the learnings of the first and applies them in 5 new communities. And we've just finished all of the launch workshops: Courtenay, Sparwood, Oshawa, and 2 regional service commissions in New Brunswick. So we've added another province. So that's another important development in the evolution of this work. And then a couple of other, there's lots of other stuff going on, but 2 I will flag. We've just released a call for expressions of interest in British Columbia to do basically the similar work as in cohort 1 and 2, but at a watershed scale and with a particular focus on smaller and rural governments, local governments. So that will be, I think, quite an exciting innovation, and it will, we hope, spark a lot of collaboration at a watershed scale between local governments. There's some other important differences. For example, in this one, we'll do all the modeling for the local governments. That's funded by NRCan and the government of BC, which has been a terrific partner for us throughout. And so you can see that online, and if there's anyone on the call who's interested in this, then obviously don't hesitate to contact one of us. And the final thing I would say is that to date, all of our work has been focused on stormwater, water quality, water quantity related issues. Also from NRCan, we have funding from the Sitka Foundation and NRCan to expand the methodology. And the expansion will allow it to encompass a range of coastal zone issues. So thus making it hopefully more, even more useful in coastal communities in the Maritimes, in BC, up north, or in Great Lakes regions. So again, we'll also, in the not too distant future, have, we hope, a call for expressions of interest in Ontario's Greenbelt, also for a watershed level project. So if any of those pique anyone's interest, please do let us know.
Perfect. Thank you, Roy. So for today's presentation, the report that you'll be hearing about is part of a series of research reports that have been developed to support the Municipal Natural Assets Initiative and the pilot projects. And these include reports on, so an introduction to defining and scoping what exactly do we mean by municipal natural assets, a report on a collaborative strategy that includes private landowners, and then, of course, today's report and identifying barriers and opportunities within the professional planning practice. So that's out now and available on the Sustainable Prosperity website, and it will be available on the mnai.ca website, which is basically your main source for resources on this initiative. And then the report that is out today was completed by a team within the School of Planning at the University of Waterloo. Oops. in the Natural Resources Conservation Planning and Management Research Group. So this group is led by Dr. Michael Drescher, and their purpose is to increase understanding of the interplay of sustainability science, policy, and systems of governance in the natural and built environments. So the web link for this group is there if you're interested in learning more about what they do. And so for today, our presenters are two of the lead researchers and authors of the report, Zoe Milligan and Rachel Edwards. I don't know, my slides are doing some funny things with me. So Zoe is a Master of Environmental Studies candidate in the School of Planning at the University of Waterloo. Her research focuses on municipal natural assets and the integration of public spaces and natural systems into urban environments. She holds a Bachelor of Environmental Studies degree from the University of Waterloo, completing the Environmental and Resource Studies Honors Co-op program with a minor in biology. Concurrently, she completed an ecological restoration and rehabilitation diploma. So more recently, Zoe has worked with the City of Mississauga on integrating urban agriculture into their planning frameworks, the Ontario Senior Secretariat working on senior aging in First Nations and Métis communities, and the City of Calgary's watershed planning team, and Native Plant Source, a company that implements environmental planning projects and low impact development features. So Zoe was awarded the John Horton Pragma Award, in 2017 for her outstanding achievements in the School of Planning and contribution to the well-being of fellow students and the broader community. And Zoe was also one of the 5 team members who won the 2018 OPPI case competition this past March. And our other presenter is Rachel Edwards. So Rachel is a PhD student in the planning department at the University of Waterloo. Prior to entering the doctoral stream, she completed a BSc in biology at the University of Saskatchewan and an MSc in conservation and biodiversity at the University of Exeter in the UK. Rachel's interests lie at the intersection of the social and environmental dimensions of conservation. In particular, her research is focused on the evaluation of conservation intervention for their broad-scale social and ecological impacts, information that can be used to promote greater equity in conservation planning decisions. Through this work, Rachel aims to contribute to improving the integration of environmental and social priorities in policy and practice. So Rachel is the 2018 recipient of the George Mulamutiel Graduate Scholarship of the Faculty of the Environment. So with that long introduction, I will turn it over to Zoe and Rachel for their presentation.
Hello, Sarah, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Perfect. Just switch over our slides quick here. Okay. Thank you, Sarah. So I'm Zoe, and I'm here with Rachel. Hey, everyone. Just so you recognize our voices. As Sarah mentioned, we're going to be discussing our research on identifying barriers and opportunities in implementing municipal natural asset management from a planning perspective within Ontario. So a brief outline of what we're going to talk about today. The first few slides will be a very brief overview of municipal natural asset management as a whole, but I feel that Roy was able to kind of talk on that. And then we'll discuss our project scope and how that fits within municipal natural asset management. We weren't sure on exactly who would be watching, so we're going to discuss a little bit about planning, the planning framework within Ontario and the components that related to our project. And then we'll get into the methods of our research. I'm then going to pass it on to Rachel, who's going to discuss the results, barriers and opportunities that we found through our interviews. And then I'll take it back on to discuss some action steps that we also kind of came up with through participants' responses. And lastly, Rachel will finalize with the role of planner within MAEM and the final conclusions. So just to start, make sure everybody understands what we're talking about with some of our wording and definitions. Municipal natural asset management, or MAEM, is essentially creating an asset management plan for natural features or areas that can provide services to our community. We're looking at natural features really through an asset management lens and creating a long-term, sustainable, cost-effective, and more resilient process for natural features and their services. Natural assets themselves are natural features that provide services used by municipalities akin to those delivered by traditional engineered infrastructure, such as kind of Roy mentioned above. And we have a table here as an example. This one, it was specifically for stormwater management. And we have the municipal services, municipal natural asset that can provide some of those services, as well as what we often have as engineered structures or infrastructure that also provides the similar service. So giving one example, drinking water treatment, wetlands, forests, vegetation, edges along water features can all provide drinking water treatment, which can alleviate pressures on water treatment plants and in some cases potentially even replace them. So I'm only going to talk very briefly about this. There are reports on the scope of municipal natural asset management as a whole, but essentially we have, or MNAI has come up with a 6-step prototype, as you can see up on the screen. This one specifically was looking at stormwater management services, but can definitely be put in other contexts as well. So first off was characterize the natural asset. Second, develop alternative scenarios around the natural asset. Then develop and run an ecological model that you're on the ecosystem you're looking at. Step 4, conduct an economic valuation using the replacement cost method, then assess beneficiaries, and finally develop an operations and maintenance plan for their natural assets. Now, I suspect this may evolve and change as pilot projects go through this in the future. But currently, this is what they have come up with. So how does our project fit within this? Well, we looked at the barriers and opportunities within kind of those 6 steps to implementing MAEM from a professional planning context and within Ontario. That being said, many of our findings can definitely be transferred to other provinces and other municipalities, for sure. So this also can be related to other provinces. Secondary objective was identify the potential role of planners in municipal natural asset management. We looked at, is there a role for planners? And if there is, what are they and how best could we utilize them? So planning in Ontario, provinces have autonomy over land use planning within their provincial borders. So this just touches upon that each province may have slightly different barriers and opportunities when it comes to policies. But in Ontario, we have the Ontario Planning Act, and it outlines the province's interests, visions, and goals and helps balance competing interests and community goals within Ontario. This act sets up the basic framework for planning within Ontario and includes aspects such as roles of government and planning requirements for a municipality. And from that stems the Provincial Policy Statement, or PPS, which provides policy directions on community development and growth within Ontario. It also contains policy directions on matters such as provincial policy interests related to land use planning and development. And the PPS tends to be reviewed every 10 years. So therefore, it's more of a current reflection of the provincial interests. And what's also mandated through the Ontario Planning Act in Ontario is that every municipality must adopt an official plan. And OPs, or official plans, lay out the land use objectives of a municipality and details how its land use will be used. They're expected to include policies on growth management, services, and infrastructure, as well as things such as community improvement initiatives and zoning bylaws. They must comply with the Planning Act, PPS, and any other regional environmental planning legislation relevant to their location. One thing we do have very unique to Ontario is conservation authorities, and they can play a significant role in municipal planning. They are based on watersheds, and generally they're there to manage water for the purpose of protecting human life and property, but their mandate has since been expanded to include natural resources that are indirectly linked to water management, as well as areas of intervention that have many linkages with human well-being. They tend to be very critical actors in local and cross-jurisdictional planning decisions, as well as key players in protecting many of Ontario's natural areas, especially within Southern Ontario. And across Canada, we have the Canadian Institute of Planners, and in Ontario, we have its affiliate, Ontario Professional Planners Institute. And these exist as professional organizations that operate as a voice, advocate, and governing body for professional planners. Practicing under these organizations by becoming a registered professional planner is an option, and they also are a very large resource. For example, last week, they actually just had their own webinar on asset management for planners, which I believe is going to be posted up on their website as well, a recording of it if you're interested in looking more at the engineered side of things. And we thought it was important to note throughout this project that the province of Ontario has been pressuring and encouraging many municipalities to adopt strong municipal asset management plans for all the engineered infrastructure. And they currently have quite extensive guideline on their website. And they're also proposing a strategic asset management policy, which is currently under review, but according to the website, they're hoping to implement in the next year or so. So now that we have kind of the planning context in Ontario, going into our actual research. So methods, a very brief overview. We conducted a literature review, which informed our interview questions and who to interview. Participants consisted of environmental, land use, and policy planners, as well as departmental directors and those that had planning-like roles. So they may not have called them, had a planner in their title, but obviously did planning. The participants tended to come from urban, as well as single or two-tier municipalities or the conservation authorities. So we interviewed all those. That data from those interviews was then ranked via two different methods, based mostly on frequency and thematic identifiers. And within those rankings, we ranked them, the rankings were examined and prioritized based on the order in which barriers would need to be overcome and opportunities should be acted upon. And from that, we then came up with a final list of the top 5 barriers and opportunities to implementing MAEM. So now I'm going to pass it on to Rachel to discuss the results and the top 5 barriers and opportunities more in detail.
Thanks, Zoe. So yeah, from our interviews, we identified a total of 26 barriers and 18 opportunities to implementing MAEM from a planning perspective. And please see section 9.2 for this full list. Now, these barriers and opportunities vary quite widely, but they generally fell into one of 7 broad themes. Everything from scale and cross-jurisdictional factors to education to technical factors. Now, after performing our 2 ranking methods that Zoe mentioned and prioritizing the resulting shortlist by the order in which barriers would need to be overcome and opportunities acted upon, we produced the following list of top 5 barriers and top 5 opportunities to implementing MAEM. And I'm now going to discuss each of these in turn, beginning with barriers. So the #1 primary barrier that we identified was this failure to conceptualize natural features as service-providing assets within planning policy. Within policy documents, although the importance of protecting natural features is frequently discussed, rarely is mention made of the actual value of these features to municipalities, apart from their aesthetic value. And the reasons presented for justifying the protection often don't go beyond vague statements such as this natural feature is important for the environment. And this failure to recognize the full suite of services that natural assets provide really results in their undervaluation in the decision-making context and perpetuates this idea that if natural assets are only important for their aesthetic value, then they can be replaced. The second primary barrier relates to this greater level of uncertainty surrounding natural assets than engineered assets. municipalities tend to be highly risk averse, and the fact that MAEM is not yet widely implemented, combined with the fact that there's this general lack of understanding about the functioning of natural assets and connections among natural assets, leads municipalities to believe that implementing MAEM is risky. Education and awareness are therefore going to be really important to overcome this barrier, reduce the level of uncertainty, and subsequently increase the uptake of MAEM, as well as clarify the process by which MAEM should take place. So third, because MAEM is this really multidisciplinary approach, successful implementation is going to require collaboration across these artificial boundaries as well as between municipal departments. However, within current municipal structure, roles tend to be quite rigidly defined, and this structure doesn't really foster the needed level of interdepartmental and interjurisdictional collaboration. And this can lead to several issues. For one, if assumptions are made about whose responsibility it is to manage transboundary natural assets, this could result in, as we've termed in our report, natural assets being or becoming orphaned or kind of left by the wayside with nobody managing them. In addition, just as when you're trying to protect a species that crosses these artificial borders, the success of MAEM could be hindered if one municipality is engaging with the process and the adjacent municipality is not. Fourth, so municipal planners are usually or almost always required to balance the interests of a wide range of stakeholders, and not all of these interests are going to align as well with MAEM. In particular, those interests of developers might not align as well with this process. And although the weight that these different interests hold in the decision-making context will vary, the interests of developers tend to be quite powerful. However, this barrier was ranked fourth down the list because it was believed that once natural features are conceptualized as assets and their full value is recognized, that they will be assigned greater value in the decision-making context. So our last barrier, in our interviews, participants frequently stated that there is a lack of resources for implementing MAEM. And although we do recognize that resource constraints are definitely a frequent issue within municipalities, these statements from participants were thought to relate less to a real lack of overall resources and more to a lack of resources that could currently be assigned to MAEM projects. And part of this stems from the fact that this true value of natural features is not recognized, and they're not allocated resources reflective of this value. If they were allocated resources reflective of the value of their services, it was thought that greater resource allocation would certainly take place. However, we also acknowledge that municipalities are always going to face a certain level of resource constraints. It's always going to be somewhat of a barrier. So now on to opportunities. The number one opportunity that was identified that was thought to have this greatest impact in terms of facilitating successful MAEM implementation was this need for a strong champion to provide leadership. All of the steps needed for a successful implementation, including finding funding, liaising with a range of departments, as well as across jurisdictions, and pushing MAEM through council in the first place, require the actions of an innovative and forward-thinking individual. And participants from municipalities that had already implemented MAEM contributed a lot of their success to such an individual, kind of spearheading the project. And participants from municipalities who had not yet implemented MAEM believed that having a champion in place was really an essential prerequisite to MAEM. And because of the interdisciplinary nature of their roles, planners were thought to be really ideally placed to fill this champion position. However, it doesn't have to be a planner, they're just particularly ideally suited. Now, for our second opportunity here, I already discussed the difficulties associated with transboundary collaboration, but how it's really needed for successful implementation of MAEM. But as Zoe mentioned, conservation authorities already have this cross-jurisdictional foundation, managing the environment at the watershed level. Utilizing the existing nature of this role, of conservation authorities' role, was thought to present an opportunity for managing large-scale natural assets. So thirdly, participants frequently brought up this fact that many natural assets, such as wetlands, are already under some form of protection. And in addition, sustainability is a primary mandate listed within many planning policies. And the many ways through which MAEM aligns and promotes the mandate of existing policy can be used as evidence for garnering support for the MAEM process. In addition, as Roy kind of started to touch on, as the impacts of climate change become more severe, the relevancy of MAEM is only expected to grow. And this was indicated almost by every participant. And also greater pressure will be placed on decision makers to really adopt sustainable strategies such as MAEM. The fourth opportunity that was identified was the utilization of resources from interest groups and government programs. And this would serve to alleviate some of the resource constraints that I mentioned earlier was a barrier. Now, participants identified a really wide range of sources from which these resources could be gained. And please have a look at our report for specific sources. Now, these resources can come in the form of funding and grants, but they can also come in the form of things like existing data from the government and environmental interest groups. And municipalities looking to engage with MAEM can, if they're able to collaborate and use some of this data, then it saves them from having to go and collect information about the natural assets from scratch. And another type of resource that can be used is human capital in the form of kind of a knowledge base, or even research teams from universities that are looking to get involved with collecting data for innovative projects like MAEM. The final opportunity in our prioritized list was this 5-year revision cycle of official plans. This is a relatively frequent revision process and really creates this window to inject MAEM supportive policy within official plans, or policy that is specifically related to MAEM. And in between these revision processes, the more evidence that can be amassed in relation to the value of natural assets, as well as the benefits of the MAEM process itself, the more likely it is that official plans will adopt supportive policies. And integrating MAEM within official plans was thought to be particularly important, as it's really one of the primary documents that planners look to when making decisions, as Zoe mentioned. So I'm now going to pass it back to Zoe, who's going to speak about the action steps that were identified to help the MAEM process.
So from interviews and our literature review, we were able to come up with a list of action steps that could help overcome the barriers identified and best utilize the opportunities mentioned by Rachel. These actions were either directly suggested to us by the participants themselves, or we noticed them emerging from a combination of our literature review search and a combination of participants' recommendations and comments. We then arranged them into 3 phases, placing each action into the phase that would most likely provide the greatest advantage to and success of municipal natural asset management. And you can see up on the slide, there's a figure we created, which has the 3 phases, as well as those action steps. And then on the side there, you'll see bubbles, the green and red bubbles. The green are the opportunities we discussed, and the red is the barriers. And these identify the most direct links between the barriers and opportunities to certain action steps. Now, we acknowledge there are lots and lots of linkages, but we found, or we thought these were the strongest. So the 3 phases we came up with was pre-MAEM implementation, 2 was the implementation of MAEM, and 3, the long-term sustainability of MAEM. So I'm going to go very briefly over each of them. In our report, we go into much more detail and actually provide many suggestions or examples, but here I'll just introduce them. So phase 1, we have 3 action steps: pre-MAEM implementation, which firstly, we had widely disseminate information on the concept and process of MAEM. So this was really providing, or hinted at providing learning opportunities and education to municipalities and professionals to the actual process of municipal natural asset management and what that meant. There was a suggestion suggestions included sharing successes and learnings from challenges that the pilot projects had come up with. And it was really emphasized overall that the process needed to be clear and communicated as such. Then we had increased profiles of natural assets, their services, and their contribution to human well-being. So the difference between this first and second one is the first one really focuses on the process of municipal natural asset management as a whole, versus the second one really brings out that conceptualization of natural assets and their services and how they can benefit our communities. So it was suggested that specific examples could be provided, maybe from pilot projects and such, and a tool created such as a list of natural assets and services they could provide municipalities, be created by either MNAI or municipalities themselves. Then municipalities could also have programs or campaigns connecting communities to ecosystems and its benefits. So something as simple as having a sign up with a name of the natural feature. So when commuters pass by, they can really connect and put a name to the face of that natural feature, to something bigger such as the 30x30 campaign conducted by David Suzuki, which encouraged local communities to spend 30 minutes outside for 30 days in May. Lastly, we had clearly established how MAEM aligns with and assists in meeting mandates of existing policies. So really leveraging existing policies that may have components that align with MAEM, which could then be used or leveraged to support, or to be used to garner support for council and upper management. A tool, actually a couple people suggested a tool such as a document identifies and links aligned components of policies between MAEM and existing policies to help planners and decision makers really navigate the complex maze of overlaying policies, so that this could really help them provide strong arguments within their own municipalities, organizations for implementing municipal natural asset management. So then we go into phase 2, which is the implementation of municipal natural asset management. And here we had 6 action steps. The first one was create collaborative partnerships among governing bodies and stakeholders. And it was really emphasized under this that there was a need for more formalized, lasting, and reoccurring partnerships, such as working committees. Second was leverage resources and other data from existing bodies and processes. So utilizing existing procedural tools, whether from the municipality from itself or from neighboring municipalities who'd conducted similar programs, instead of starting from scratch within the municipality. And second, within that was coordinate efforts between municipalities or conservation authorities looking at or inventorying the same natural area or resource. And utilizing resources provided by interest groups such as FCM, Infrastructure Ontario, or collaborating with local community groups such as local naturalists clubs or Parks Club. And thirdly was take advantage of policy windows. And this really draws in the 5th opportunity that Rachel mentioned with the 5-year OP review, so taking advantage of that, as well as system shocks such as extreme events, which can emphasize the need for these more sustainable practices, and the province interest as a whole in asset management. So next, our 4th on our list was minimize the gap between status quo and MAEM to make the initial implementation more palatable. So not having to have to start really big, feel fine to start with small projects with only a couple natural assets within the municipality, and it was suggested visible projects were probably best to start with as well, and then building from there. And then we have developed clear legislation and guidelines and processes for the protection and management of natural assets. So we've mentioned this a couple times, but really making sure you're concise, clear, and straightforward within guidelines and standards and processes, and trying to stay away from very ambiguous vocabulary. And lastly, we have research natural assets to provide evidence to planners and guidance for decisions around municipal natural asset management. And many of these steps mentioned before can actually assist in this as well. And last, we have the third phase, long-term success and long-term sustainability and success, to really ensure that this process doesn't fizzle out over time. So creating a long-term standardization of related processes for municipal natural asset management. So it's emphasized by our participants that a standardized process that could be somewhat replicable was favored, but also flexible enough to fit in many different contexts. Then we have working towards having MAEM incorporated into high-level planning policy in the long term. So working towards getting favorable policy towards MAEM at a provincial level, and pursuing more direct wording, having policies that directly enable or even require rather just encourage or acknowledge natural areas and features. And lastly, leveraging existing development processes to improve MAEM effectiveness. So planners and municipalities in Ontario can utilize development applications through putting conditions in assisting long-term success of natural features. And this touches a little bit on the private side as well as the municipal public side. But if you're interested more in the private lands, they do have, MNAI does have a document out as well. Now I'm going to pass it back to Rachel to discuss the role of planners.
Yeah, so in our interviews, aside from identifying barriers and opportunities, we also wanted to figure out, do planners have a role in MAEM, and what exactly is this role going to be? So although opinions varied somewhat with regards to what this role would be, across the board, all participants thought that yes, planners would play a role in MAEM, and many participants thought that this role would be significant. Participants thought that there were three types of planners that would play particularly important roles within MAEM, and these were land use planners, environmental planners, and policy-based planners. In addition, the roles that participants identified generally fell into one of these three themes. So a role as a facilitator, a role in policy generation, and a technical role. Now, the role that was most frequently cited by participants was that planners would really be these facilitators of knowledge transfer and knowledge integration. It was thought that planners would be important for liaising among different municipalities, departments, as well as stakeholders to coordinate MAEM activities. And because the role of planners is usually quite interdisciplinary to begin with, their breadth of knowledge, both in terms of the needs and interests of different stakeholders, as well as their broad knowledge of a wide range of disciplines, was thought to make them quite ideal for this facilitatory position. And in this role, planners were thought to be involved with the development of MAEM strategies, the identification of management outcomes, identifying and recruiting different people to undertake the different stages of MAEM that Zoe mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, as well as integrating the information delivered by these various specialists. The second role that emerged from our interviews really relates to policy, and this is both at the provincial and municipal level. First of all, planners have this advisory role in the creation and reform of high-level policy, such as the Provincial Policy Statement and the Planning Act. And as has already been indicated, incorporating MAEM into these high-level policies is thought to be really key for promoting MAEM uptake among planners. And therefore, planners can improve the success of MAEM through promoting policy reform that aligns with MAEM, as well as policy reform that directly incorporates the MAEM process. Now, at the municipal level, planners were also thought to play a role with policy, but this was more in a bottom-up, through a bottom-up process. First of all, through promoting awareness of the benefits of M&AM, planners can engender support for the process from council as well as their CAO. Also, through gaining this support, planners can contribute to changes in bylaws, such as zoning bylaws, as well as official plans that are more aligned with M&AM. And again, official plans are really important documents that planners look to in the decision-making context. So it's really important that M&AM specific policy, or that aligns with M&AM, is incorporated into these official plans. In addition, planners can work towards increasing the public's awareness of natural assets and their value to really engender stakeholder support. And finally, with regards to this policy role, planners can improve M&AM success through their role in the implementation of policy. And an example is through leveraging policy in support of natural asset conservation in the development review process. Now, all of these roles, these policy roles, as well as the role of the planner as facilitator, really highlight the benefits that can be gained through planners acting as champions of the M&AM process. There was a lot less agreement from participants with regard to the extent of planners' involvement with technical aspects of M&AM. Some participants thought that planners would be highly involved with technical aspects, such as inventorying and assessing the condition of natural assets, as well as the physical management of natural assets. And others really disagreed and believed that planners' involvement would be more high level. And this disagreement was thought to relate a lot to the variation in the planners' current roles within their municipalities. And therefore, the extent of a planner's involvement within this technical aspect of M&AM is likely to vary significantly depending on the specific municipality in question. So I'm now going to conclude with an overview of the primary conclusions that really emerged from our research. I would really highly encourage you to view the report in full for a more in-depth look at the way forward. In particular, I really direct you to section 5 on action steps that Zoe discussed. So first of all, from our interviews, it was concluded that yes, planners have the potential to play a key role in successful implementation of M&AM. However, in order for planners to really contribute to this success, it's very important that those looking to implement M&AM really work towards overcoming the identified barriers and act on the opportunities through implementing the action steps that we discussed. And implementing the action steps in the pre-implementation phase relating to education and awareness is going to be particularly important for facilitating kind of widespread conceptualization of natural features as these service-providing assets among not only planners, but also public, council, and other stakeholders. And finally, a champion to support and spearhead the M&AM process is essential for successful implementation. And although planners are thought to be really ideally suited for this role, others can certainly fulfill it. Ultimately, successful implementation is going to require support at multiple levels, including support from those in more influential positions, such as CAOs, as well as those carrying out day-to-day project activities. And it's also going to require, in the long term, policy creation and reform. So thank you so much for coming out and listening to this webinar today. I hope you found it informative and useful. If you'd like more information on this project specifically, please don't hesitate to contact Zoe or myself. And if you'd like more information on the M&AM process in general, please contact Sarah O'Neill at Smart Prosperity. And I'm now going to turn it back over to Sarah to facilitate our question period.
Thank you, Zoe and Rachel. That was a really excellent presentation, and after having read the full report, that was a really great overview of the key comments and the key findings from your report. So now I'm opening it up. We have about 10 minutes left. So if anyone has any questions, I do see there is one in the comments. We had one. I'll draw your attention to the group chat box. So there was one just comment thanking us for the presentation, but also on applying the term of barrier versus applying the term of challenge. Zoe and Rachel, I'm not sure if you want to touch on that comment at all.
Okay. Excellent.
More just the use of the term barriers is it gets to that point of being risk averse, and challenge is a more easily acceptable term.
Yeah, I guess we've always just thought of them as barriers, more from the beginning of this report, as barriers and opportunities. That was
But that's a really good point. Like, I mean, that was one of our things that we talked about within our participants' interviews, the use of language, and maybe using challenge is less scary for municipalities than barriers. So yeah, well, thank you for the comment.
yeah.
And we have another question here from Catherine. We agree with the importance of education, but where does the existing technical information on the value of natural assets exist to bolster those educational arguments? I'll maybe just, before handing it over to Zoe and Rachel, if you go to the mnai.ca website, there is a number of documents there that we have produced in support of that provide a lot of that background on natural assets and municipal natural assets in particular. Some of the technical information, that's what will be coming out soon when the technical reports from the first round of pilot projects is released. And we're hoping that'll be out within the next month or so. But those are kind of the first, in Canada at least, the first real examples of municipalities taking the municipal natural asset management process and applying it to specific natural assets and services within their own municipality, and using software to identify the value of those services. And so if you keep an eye out on that website and on our social media, we also have a Facebook page, you can see when those documents are released and get that information from there.
Yeah, and there's lots of information just on the benefits of these natural assets to municipalities within the literature, and there's increasingly like open access literature is increasingly becoming available. I mean, just as an example, there's lots of literature on the benefits of leaving wetlands in place and how this can really save municipalities, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars, by reducing the damage or the flood risk to that municipality. That's just one example.
Okay, so another question here is, what is the relationship of MNAI to green infrastructure? If you want to, we have in the MNAI key documents, we have the report that's called Defining and Scoping Municipal Natural Assets. And in there, there's a figure where we try to differentiate between the term green infrastructure and what we're looking at in terms of natural assets. So we took the viewpoint that green infrastructure is an umbrella term that includes natural assets, it includes enhanced assets like rain gardens or bioswales, and it includes engineered assets, so like green roofs, permeable pavement, that type of thing. So that green infrastructure term includes natural assets, but natural assets are one category within that term. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and just to note on that, we gave an opportunity. We provided that the figure to our participants, and we gave the participants opportunity to comment on the MAEM as a whole. And that was one thing that was brought up a lot, was that figure and how that was framed, which was quite interesting. And I think we do bring up in one of our comment or barriers and comments was just how being flexible potentially for that term, depending on the municipality.
Mm-hmm. Great. Is there any other questions here? Has work started to identify the need that these natural assets would require ongoing management and maintenance to ensure that the benefits continue to be realized?
So is the question relating to, has evidence started, have we started to collect evidence as to how they would need to be managed and maintained over the long term? Is that kind of?
I think so. I think that's Heather. I don't know if you want to clarify. Yeah, I think it's in terms of maybe like our engineered infrastructure requires obvious operations and maintenance over the life cycle, but in terms of natural assets, has that been looked into?
I mean, there's lots of like I don't know if there's specifically with relation to MAEM, but there's lots of literature on the need to maintain them in the long term, and that was actually one of the kind of barriers that we came up with, is that there's this like this conceptualization among some that you can just put a fence around a natural asset and then just leave it, and that was one thing that's going to be we'll need to overcome that conceptualization to so that there's a more widespread understanding of the need to manage and maintain these natural assets long term. You can't just leave them and think that they're going to stay that way in that condition for, yeah.
Especially in urban environments or areas that have impact, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you go on the mnai.ca website and look for the information from Gibson's, they do have a case study of where they included kind of their every 3 years the costs that they used to do to dredge some of their stormwater or their wetland ponds versus what it would require to replace those ponds with engineered infrastructure. So some of that information would be in there. I think that's something that the information and evidence is starting to be out there, but there isn't a lot. So you do have to search for it just a little bit. Okay. So I'll just read the next question from Adam. You mentioned the critical role of champions in leading the process for municipalities. I'm wondering if there was any discussion of how to develop or motivate a potential municipal champion to come forward. I'm thinking of lower capacity municipalities where there may be interest, but the champion does not have the resources, tool, or time available to start prioritizing this. Any thoughts on this or perspectives from your research? Thanks for a great presentation.
I think one of the things that emerged from our research was that, yes, you need that kind of person undertaking the day-to-day activities to really push it through, but you need that higher level support from the CAO or someone in that who has the ability to allocate resources and that kind of thing. You kind of need both of those in place. That's one thing that emerged from our interviews. Do you have anything else?
Yeah, it was suggested, like, even if, let's say, you're not as position as influential, even just approaching your upper management, providing, a little bit of this support, the project, asking maybe to connect with MNAI as well to discuss ins and outs. That could be done if you're trying to find someone to champion. If yourself, you could always step up and take a bit of ownership and provide a presentation on this if you think it would fit better within in your municipality or organization.
Yeah, and also another thing that emerged with regards to this champion was that if they can go out there and gather some of the evidence, go to conferences, learn more about the MNAM process, then bring that to their CEO and show that there is evidence that this is a process that can save us money, that's going to be good for our municipality, then that can help to get that high level support and get the resources that way as well.
I know you had some pilot projects already. Did you hear anything from them specifically, Sarah, that some of the champions you know through them?
I'm not sure about, so the interesting thing is that, as Roy mentioned earlier, the next phase of the MNAI is to have this project with lower capacity municipalities. So I think in terms of this question, it'll be interesting to see kind of what their viewpoint is on championing the municipal natural asset within their community. That call for expressions of interest is just out. So I feel like this is a question that we might not have the answer to right now, but because of that project that's just started, we will likely have some good information to come for that. Yeah, and then I'm very sorry that I skipped over someone's question. Fraser, I'll just read out the comment. So first, I think this is exceptional work. Thank you. Further to one of the prior questions, you identified the perception of risk as a key barrier, which is common with new technologies and practices. Has work been done to demonstrate that natural assets are in fact less risky or perform more reliably? It would be interesting to study if natural assets reliability are conditional depending on factors not normally considered in the use of engineered infrastructure.
Nope. So I'm just going up to that.
Yeah, it's a little, I unfortunately skipped it.
Barrier, which is common.
So I think part of this is the first round of pilot projects is done, and that in itself will provide some evidence. And now you have the second round of pilot projects going, and the more that can be done, the more evidence will be gained for that this process isn't risky. I think the perception of risk comes a lot from the fact that MAEM isn't widely implemented yet, but more pilot projects are undertaken, the more that will help to alleviate some of that perception. And also the more that that understanding can be spread of how these natural assets function and their relationship to one another will also help to alleviate some of that perception. Do you have anything to add? Or Sarah?
I'll just maybe, in terms of the first round of pilot projects, one of the interesting results that came out of some of those is that when they did the modeling under kind of status quo scenarios, and then they did a climate change scenario, the natural assets had a higher value. So they kind of showed their resiliency in terms of climate change impacts, which would say that they were a little bit less risky than having engineered infrastructure. So I think that's it's a broad question, but I think some of the results from the technical reports will address that risk factor a little bit. And I think we're past time, so I'll just read the final comment that we have here, and then we'll wrap up. So it's from Christine. All management plans, all assets should address ongoing maintenance. The beauty of natural assets is that they can be treated in a similar fashion to built assets within an asset management plan. Yes, and that is one of the beauties of natural assets, is that once we can actually include them in the same type of asset management planning as we do for other assets. And in there, I think we will begin to see their effectiveness and their resiliency come through. So I think that's all we have time for today. If anyone has any additional questions for Zoe or Rachel, you have their contact information there. If you have any other information or questions regarding the Municipal Natural Assets Initiative, you can contact me, or you can contact Roy or any of the other partners involved in the process through the MAEI.ca website. And just a reminder that this is a recorded session, so we will be processing the session and then sending it out to anyone who is registered, but we will also be posting it on the website, so you can share that around to anyone who might be interested in what was talked about today. And also finally, that the report itself is available on the Smart Prosperity website and will soon be up as well on the MAEI.ca website. So you can take the information presented today and dig a little bit deeper into some more of the information that's available in the report. So thank you, Zoe and Rachel, for your presentation today, and I hope everyone has a good remainder of the day. Thank you.
Thank you.